Awesome. You eat the plants? Awesome. All right, we got so much to do. It's a lot of you. Marcia, do you want to get started?
Everyone could turn their mics on.
Check.
Check. Fabulous.
You should be looking for a green light on the top here.
You have to kind of.
Hello.
Check.
All right, I think we are good to go.
Yeah, it's
Fabulous.
green up here.
Hey, Mark.
Oh, yes, hello.
Paul, are you? Good to see you, Mark.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it's green up here.
Hey, Mark.
Paul, are you? Good to see you, Mark.
Thank you so much. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. This is the Children's Services Council of Leon County Executive Director Search Committee meeting. We are called to order. I'll note that all members of the committee are present. First up is approval of the agenda, and we need to.
Hold on one.
Someone's got the whatever we're doing on.
First up is approval of the agenda, and we need to.
Someone's got the whatever we're doing on. So there's like about a 10-second delay and. But it.
There's usually, it's coming through the YouTube feed, and it's
So
usually
there's like about a
a,
10-second delay.
but yeah, a 10-second delay.
Yeah.
Yes, you can hear it now.
Hopefully that will stop.
So in case anybody utters foul language.
new member. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that we add Commissioner Cummings to what is this committee?
This is the Executive Director Search Committee.
This is the Executive Director Search Committee, and I will move that we add Commissioner Cummings to the Executive Director Search Committee.
Is there a second?
What is this?
This is the moved and seconded. Any discussion, debate? Any objection? Seeing no objection, we will show our new committee, including Commissioner Cummings. Welcome aboard, Commissioner Cummings. Any objections? Seeing no
We are getting the feedback again. I know we have a new team here today, so I'm just gonna let him know again that
Welcome aboard, Commissioner Cummings.
they're hearing it on the other end. We're just getting feedback, but I don't think that the feedback's going through to our audience. If we're okay with proceeding, even though it's slightly annoying.
It adds to the ambiance of chaos, which we're all accustomed.
Yeah, our own voices is white noise.
So
right.
I would suggest we just press on as best we can. So that brings us to the search committee process. And Ted, I would like you to run us through the search committee process.
Thank you, Judge. Actually starting Friday night, Holly and I spent the weekend and yesterday reviewing the applications and talking about a new process, which we actually started about last week. We're going to be talking about that process today because of the timeline, because of everybody's schedules. We've really been trying to work it. I apologize to each of you and to your assistants, those of you who have assistants for the back and forths. But I think we finally have, as of this morning, actually, we've got the dates and times nailed for the interviews and for the training and everything else. We're going to be talking about a process by which hopefully the committee will be able to work through things in a very timely fashion and get the best outcome as we go. So to kind of give a sequential discussion or begin a sequential discussion of what we're talking about, Holly's going to talk about the updates on the applications and what we've got.
And some, if I could just point one thing out, to me, for the next 10 years, there are two votes that this board will make that I think are as important as any two. This is one of them, and the other is the IT Act. And so, while I'm in no rush, that's a compliment to you, I think. It is a compliment to you, but it's also acknowledgement that I want to make sure we get this right. So I don't mind it being slowed down as long as you're healthy. And you seem to be. So.
Well, if I might, Judge, the bottom line is if we don't accommodate this schedule, and I talked this morning with Chauncey, it delays the interviews until probably November and into December. Because of everybody's schedule at schools, at the hospital, in the courthouse, with session and all of that kind of stuff, and with commission meetings and whatnot. So we think this is doable. We'll talk about the timeframes as we go down and what we're looking at, because there are some decision points y'all will have to make today with regard to number of interviews you're going to do, et cetera, or that you're going to be targeting, et cetera. That'll be important in terms of the process moving forward. What we're looking at, because there are some decision points y'all.
So going on that, on page 3 in your packet, you'll find there's 2 pages, 3 and 4, and that is the total number of applicants, and you'll have all of their names and what that means. So the first thing to note is that 166 applications were received. 73 were eliminated, and that's what that did not meet technical requirements. Because of the different places that we advertise the position, multiple people just clicked the button to say, submit it, or submit application, as opposed to following the directions that we asked for, which included to submit a cover letter, their resume, and their salary history and requirements to an email address. Every single person who submitted something through one of those apps was contacted and requested to please follow the directions. 73 did not. Of the 93 that remain, 2 were eliminated because they did not include a cover letter. quite literally just a resume. There was no cover letter or preamble even in the email address. That's all that was left. So 91 remained, and that is what staff, myself and Mr. Granger were asked to review. And what we did with those 91 is rank them in a qualified, not qualified, and a maybe. That's what the question mark kind of bubble is. Then we took all 91 of those rankings and we assigned a point value.
So I'm curious, of the 91 qualified that you then took a look at, do you know how many needed assistance to?
That's a great question. And we do have the data on that. I don't have it at my fingertips today. There were a number of individuals who clearly pressed the button to submit. I'm going to use, for example, Indeed. They clearly pressed the button. And then they also sent the email, but I still, because there were so many, 166 that were coming in, I still messaged every single person, regardless if they had already taken that extra step. There were a couple of comments back to me. I already submitted that. I was like, thank you so much. Standard protocol. We're just telling everybody, if you use LinkedIn, ZipRecruiter, Indeed, Chronicles of Philanthropy, that we also ask them to do it. I can get that information to you so that you can.
So maybe what I could. Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you. You're recognized.
Appreciate that. The of the, oh, thank you. Yeah, if as we go through this process, I would just like to know if we're interviewing someone, if I'm going to be asking someone questions, I would like to know in the back of my mind whether or not they submitted a completed application.
Perfect. I will have that information for you.
If I'm going to be asking
Sorry,
someone-
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Principal Connor, you are recognized.
I will have that information. I'm getting to this as well. Sorry, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right, so Commissioner Cummings, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a couple of questions and concerns about the process. I apologize for meeting, but my first question is, were the applicants on notice that there were some technical requirements that if not met, they would be eliminated? Number one, that's a process that the Children's Services Council body approved of. Number one. Number two, the criteria. Well, I don't see a criteria, but I'd like to know what criteria was used to determine who was qualified, who was not qualified. Hopefully it was an objective criteria and not subjective criteria. Is that something that's written for members of the council?
Mr. Chair?
You are recognized, Ms. McPhail.
I can answer the first one, and then I'll ask Mr. Granger to join me to answer your second question, Commissioner. The first question is, every single person was notified in a message that said, that was also approved on the position description, what they were supposed to submit. So the technical requirements were to submit via email by 5 p.m. on Friday, August 20th, a cover letter, resume, and salary/history requirements. That was what was approved by the council. For every individual who submitted via the app, we added the line, failure to do so would result in your application not being considered. That process, my recollection, Mr. Granger, was not discussed by the full council, but because it was in the actual position description of the instructions on how to apply, we wanted to make sure that they saw that. So we lifted the language directly from there to say, make sure that you see.
Commissioner Cummings?
Yes, a follow-up question. So out of the 73 that were eliminated for technical requirements, can you tell us what type technical requirements? I understand if they missed a deadline. So is there a group that missed a deadline, another group, or did they all just miss the deadline?
Mr. Chair?
You are recognized, Ms. McPhail.
They did not submit an email at all. So the 73 did not submit an email. That wasn't that they were missing pieces. There was 2 that did submit an email that were missing pieces, but the 73 did not submit an email. There have been 2 who have reached out this week and have said, oh, I missed the deadline. Oops. But they missed the deadline. The other individuals, there's been 0 response.
If I might, Mr. Chair, we advertised through several vehicles to make sure we had as broad a hit across the country as we could. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. McPhail, but many of those were through LinkedIn and one other internet service where you could download your resume, push a button, it's gone. Many of them, as I understood it, and through the others, didn't submit an email because you push the button, it's gone. And, you know, they're going through, well, our assumption is they're going through many, and they didn't. And as a result, many of them didn't respond when we said, please send us the information.
Commissioner Cummings?
Follow up, yes, just for clarification. So 73 didn't push the button, didn't submit the application is what you're saying?
They submitted their resume.
Oh, they didn't submit the resume.
Wait, I'm sorry, I'll let Ms. McPhail knows what's going on here.
Ms. McPhail,
So-
distinguish for us between the resume and the email.
So 166 individuals submitted something through some sort of process.
Distinguish for us.
Some individuals did not go through LinkedIn, and I have a list that will clarify exactly where they came from, which is why I can answer Mr. Mitchell's question that he submitted or that he requested earlier. Of those individuals who did use LinkedIn, Indeed, Chronicles of Philanthropy, or ZipRecruiter at a push of a button, 73 of those did not respond to the follow-up email that they received through the app that they submitted their resume through. 73 of them did not respond. 73 of those did not respond to the follow-up email that they received.
And if I can just follow up.
You may, go ahead.
Their resume through.
We got the application. What was the email? That was the email, the cover letter, is what we're saying?
So the email went to, it was a message through the application app that they used, and it was a message that said, thank you for submitting your resume via insert app name. The requirements of this application are to submit these 3 items by 5 p.m. on this date to this place. Failure to do so may result in your application not being considered further. Every single person even those who also already submitted an email, every single person who used the app received that message. And the way that the system works is that when it goes through the message system, you receive an email in your inbox that says, Polly McPhail sent you this message, or the Children's Services of Leon County sent you this message. And when they log into that app, there's a notification that also tells them you have a message waiting for you. And so we started sending the exact same message customized to the app that was used beginning at the end of July. So as soon as applications started rolling in, the exact same message was delivered to every single person. Exact same message customized to the app that was used.
All right,
May I
excellent.
have one?
Commissioner Cummings.
Yeah.
So as soon as
Okay,
applications
I don't know, it just seems strange to me that 73 people would take time to submit an application. And I'm not saying this anybody. Are we sure that from our technical standpoint, that we have done what we need to do to double check and make sure that they receive the correspondence? Because it's just strange to me that 73 people that took time to submit through LinkedIn and you said some other avenues, I believe, would not respond to a simple request to send an email with additional information. I don't know, the volume, it just bothers me. But you've double checked the technology that we are dealing with. And you verified that they did receive that notification to submit additional information by a certain deadline.
Ms. McPhail?
in the platforms that allow the message to be shown as read, and so there, and again, we're working with 4 different platforms, I did confirm that. There were some that, for example, Chronicles of Philanthropy do not allow you to see that a message was read. But we know that the 3 that I think, please give me a little bit of grace on the actual numbers for each platform. In Chronicles of Philanthropy, 2 of the 3 responded with an email. And I did go through every single one to make sure that a message was sent to every single one of them. And in ZipRecruiter and LinkedIn and Indeed, you can see that those messages have been received and delivered. And I did go through every.
Mr.
if I could-
Mitchell.
So sorry, can I add one more thing?
Oh, sure, go ahead, Ms. McPhail.
Experience in job hunting, oftentimes, especially on LinkedIn and Indeed, potentially ZipRecruiter as well. It's a very, you go through and you can literally apply to 7 jobs in a minute. You can see them pop up and it's literally a click of a button and it submits something. Almost every single one of the individuals who uploaded a customized cover letter into, say, for example, Indeed or LinkedIn and received that message, then submitted it via email. I can think in my head about 7 or 8 of them that I could probably name right now who received the message on one of those platforms that had also submitted a customized cover letter that followed up with an email. Many of the ones who did not respond, many of them, and I could quantify this for you and report back to the committee, were just resumes, no customization. We also asked questions, like leading questions to get some history. Many of those also did not answer those. Not all, but many.
Fair enough. Mr. Mitchell?
Sure. And Commissioner Cummings, I think this is sort of where Holly was going and is kind of consistent. If you're on LinkedIn, you get these notices, right? I'm not looking for a job, but I get notices. And the same job for 17 years. I'm not going anywhere. But I get messages. And all you have to do, to Ms. McPhail's point, is click. And it is not actually submitting an application. The application is a cover letter, your resume, and all you have to do something else. I guess there's 3 components. That makes up an application. When LinkedIn sends you a notice that says, hey, we think you might be a great candidate for an executive. When LinkedIn sends you a notice that says, hey, we think you might be a great candidate for an executive.
We're trying.
Okay, so if you, so if I get that and I say, yeah, I guess I'm interested, And then Holly sends you, Ms. McPhail sends you an email that says, hey, we received your resume. Thank you for your interest. Oh, by the way, now we want a cover letter, which requires a little extra work. And we need you to upload it to this email address. I think that this process was weeding out those who were not genuinely interested. Now, much like if there are people who, like I would like to know who can't follow simple instructions. And I don't mean that in a critical way, but it is, we're hiring someone who's going to need to follow critical instructions. The same thing is true if there is someone out there of the 166 who have submitted something and they feel like there are extenuating circumstances that their application was intended to be submitted, they didn't get an email, they didn't see the email, whatever it is, I would certainly like them to be considered as well. So, Commissioner, if of the 73 who only uploaded or sent a resume, if they're listening to this report or this live YouTube, and there's some extenuating circumstances that we've missed, there's a technology glitch, whatever it is, I think if they reach out to Ms. McPhail in the email that was provided, the email address that was provided, you know, we could certainly consider it. I just think, I think they've sort of done us a favor by not following instructions. But if they never got those instructions, I think that's an extenuating circumstance. I just think, I think.
All right, thanks so much. What is the next part of our presentation? Mr. Granger, I think, are we on Mr. Granger, Ms. McPhail?
Yes, actually, to discuss.
All right, thanks so much. What is the next part of our presentation? Mr.
Microphone.
Granger, I think, are we on Mr. Granger, Ms. McPhail?
I'm sorry.
That was
That's not
it.
solving the issue. But we're trying. Thank you, guys.
Yes, Judge. Ms. McPhail is going to discuss the application evaluations at this point.
That's not solving the issue.
So, before we get that, can I ask one question? What are the, what are the
application evaluations at this point?
questions that resulted in the combined scores? How did people get or lose points? Can I ask one question?
Mr. Granger, do you want to tack that or you want me to start?
I'll let you get it. I remember the ones for the evaluation that they're going to do. We handled it a little bit different.
Sure. So Mr. Granger is going to talk about a process that's outlined in your packet that's called objective selection. And in that debriefing that we did, one of the messages that we received is when you go to do the pre-screening, the key thing that you do is be completely objective and consistent in how you do it. So when you go to rank something, in this case, it was a 3-point Likert scale, and I'll push it back once so you can see what those 3 points were. As long as independently, I applied that 3-point Likert scale in a consistent way, and Mr. Granger applied that. Then when we came together, it would wear out in how the sausage is made, in essence. That's how we talked and were, I don't want to use the word trained, but in our debriefing of how we would apply it. And in that, we were looking at the position description as a whole, looking at minimum education qualifications and the minimum experience qualifications as approved by the council. And we were not going into each domain. What we did was go in and say, do you meet those minimum qualifications? And if you do, does the experience measure up with what we're looking for? And that's where the check, yes, minus, no, or the plus was what we said for the yes, but they met them, a minus for no, they did not meet them, or they were somewhere in the middle. And right, so there was like, well, they're not like a shoe-in or like, yes, 100% it's super clear based on what they submitted, but there was potentially some opportunity there. So kind of that 3 piles of a yes, no, maybe. That's what we used consistently, independently of one another, and then we took those scores, and that's what came up with this grid here.
12, the 5 to 12.
Yes.
And, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Sorry, Commissioner Cummings. The points, the 2 points,
This grid here.
1.0 points
Yes.
was applied to education, experience, 2 points, just those 2? 0 points
As a whole,
was applied to.
so not independently.
education,
So we didn't go plus minus question, 3 points
experience.
for education, 3 points for experience. It was as a whole for that. Did they meet the minimum qualifications as described in the position description? For education, 3 points. The next step, and we'll get there in terms of process, which is actually kind of on the next slide. That's the next round, is to now go in and rank on a 5-point scale. And I'll jump ahead with the
So,
next
wait,
step.
Mr.
And
Chair?
we'll get there in
Yes,
terms of
Mr. Mitchell, you're
process, which is
recognized.
No, Commissioner Cummings. yeah, okay.
That's the next
So I want to
round,
make sure I
is
get
now
this.
go in and
We've got 91 applications that were submitted with the basic requirements. The resume, the cover letter, and something else, whatever the third. Email.
the salary reference.
Oh, the salary, thank you. So we got 91 that make the first cut. Of those 91, you went through and you said, did they meet the minimum qualifications that we set like 2 or 3 meetings ago? Did they, and did they meet the experience? Again, that we talked about as a full board a couple of meetings ago. 2 or 3 meetings. And from that group, we have 46 of the 91 that didn't meet. They did everything right. They submitted their application, but they had a high school education, not a bachelor's, although we preferred a master's or something. So 46 of them didn't qualify. And again, your scale, it was up here, but that would be a 0.
That is correct.
Okay.
Point of clarification, it was a bachelor's degree, it was our minimum in a specified field.
Correct.
So for example, if they had a bachelor's degree in, say, hospitality, that was not one of the assigned fields. If they had a bachelor's degree in sports medicine or nursing, those were not in the minimum description that we described. If in those cases, we would still look then at their experience in the fields that we're looking for. So I just wanted to be very clear. You insinuated, or what I heard was they had a high school diploma. And there were many candidates who did in fact have a bachelor's degree, but just not in the ascribed field that was advertised in the position description.
And they were not disqualified. They just didn't get the full score.
Correct.
All right, anything else? Commissioner Cummings? And they were not disqualified. They just didn't get the full score.
Correct.
All right, anything else? Commissioner Cummings?
What the points were for a desired
They were not disqualified.
education or desired degree?
Correct.
All right, anything else?
College, you know, in that particular area, of a level degree, education, the extra one, master's degree, social services area, doctoral degree. I mean, I feel like it was objective, but I would like to see you have it on paper, or can you tell me how the points were assigned as staff was doing it? I just want to make sure everybody was consistent and we didn't really get out of contact.
Ms. McPhail?
And the individuals either met it or they didn't. So there was no point scale of you have an upper degree, therefore you got a bonus point.
Ms. McPhail?
Correct. So it was a plus, which was you met it, a question mark, you were somewhere in the middle, or a minus, you didn't meet the qualifications. We then assigned those three elements. And this was per our discussion through the objective selection process to take the applications and either they met the minimum qualifications and had the experience, on the minimum experience we were looking for, and they went into this pile, or they didn't. And then you had all the others in the middle. And that's what we're presenting to you today, is those who met it and all the ones that were somewhere in the middle.
Commissioner Cummings?
What was the highest number of points obtained
A 2.
based on your evaluation?
Per applicant, a 2. But then when we
Yeah, I
can,
mean, for any particular applicant, highest number of points was 2.
in this step of the process,
This first step.
yes, ma'am, the next step will have more.
Okay, so this first step was basically education experience,
Yes, ma'am.
right?
Yes, ma'am.
Member O'Brien.
So just as a clarification, in this initial process, there was an aggregate score. Was it a combination of different scores that landed together to pull a 1 or 2? It was an aggregate score that gave them a 1. And this was just basically a filtering process.
That is correct. The pre-screening.
So that then I understand the next step is then you just.
Correct.
Okay,
So
just wanna make sure I understand.
That's exactly it. Yes, sir.
and the next step was when we combined the two, so that where we found the, like my scores versus Mr. Granger's scores, and we combined them to create an aggregate score. That's why it jumped up to the maximum being a 4. So for example, if you see a 4 there, on my rating scale, that individual received a 2 as well as a 2 for Mr. Granger. In some cases, it was a 2 for me and a 1 for him, or a 2 for him and a 1 for me, which would equate to the 3. And so when we combined them all, this is a little bit of that aggregate piece. That's what created the delineation, if you will, between the yeses, which would be the 4s, the maybes, which would be the 1s, 2s, and 3s, and the nos, which would be the 0s.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Mitchell, you recognized.
So in looking at the advertisement that went out, I understand the education minimum qualifications. And I see there is a master's degree in one of the areas can substitute for 2 years of experience. Where does it say how many? I see the professional experience qualifications. Where does it say how many years of experience? Was it 5 years? What, I can't remember.
Mr. Granger, you recognized.
On page 8 of the meeting packet,
Right.
under minimum educational requirements, it's 8 years. A bachelor's degree in 8 years and a master's degree could substitute for up to 2 years.
Minimum of 8 years experience. Yeah, okay, so that would be 6 years then, and, okay,
Yes, sir.
all right. So going back to, Mr. Chair, going back to my original question, the 91 people make it in. The second step is, do they have the minimum education qualifications and the minimum work experience qualifications? And that is a total of 45. You then took those 45 and have said, here's the result. I mean, we took all 91. I'm going to ignore the 0. If you didn't, if neither of you thought that they met the minimum qualifications, I'm comfortable with that. I can only speak for myself. The 45, though, if you're even remotely qualified, I'd like to see your application. I mean, that I'd rather look at more, not interview more, but look at more.
That's the next. Oh,
All right, so I believe that is a perfect segue into Mr. Granger's next presentation. Mr. Granger, you recognize. Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
Okay, and we'll come back to the evaluation.
Well, the question is that
Okay,
one.
yeah.
So that actually brings us to the very next point of how we'll process this next part. The reason why we didn't meet with you individually or provide all the applications was, as Mr. Granger informed you, there were so many of them. So at this point, we can provide all 45 to you. We can provide the top tier if that's what you want. This is completely the will of the committee. I'll advance on the deck just to point to one of the pieces that are in your packet. on page 5 and 6. This is where your work comes in, is now evaluating in a consistent manner. And we will provide a 1-hour training to that process that Mr. Granger will talk about in a moment. But in essence, this next step is to take all of those applications, however many you as a committee determine that you want to review. And we will provide you a score sheet and the 5-point scale where you're going to be looking at the 5 domains identified in the position description of what the expectations of the job are based on the review. So you'll be able to dive in, look at their cover letter, look at their entire resume, and make again, independently using that scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is well qualified and 1 is not qualified in each of those domains. So I think that this might go to the commissioner's question earlier about how many points total someone could potentially earn. And in this case, it would be 25 per application, where you would have up to 5 points in these 5 categories. Then you would be tasked to, of those, identify your top 10. Now, in this process, we would ask that you not make any notes or anything on these score sheets. These score sheets would then be turned into staff and become part of the public record, but your personal notes or questions about anybody you can maintain in your own possession. When we come back together on the 8th, then, and at that moment, we would then, our goal is to whittle down to the top list that we would like to interview. So based on your evaluation of as many in that rank that you would want to rank them, submit the sheet, we come together.
Mr. O'Brien, you're recognized.
So the process in this point forward, one is training for us on this 5-point scale.
Yes.
Secondly, another decision for us is determine how deep down that list do you want to get. All 45? Do you want to take 29? Do you take 7? Right?
Yes, sir.
Sure, I understand the process. I personally do how this go through 40. I've gone through this type of process before. 45 applications take a lot of applications. To give any sort of credit. We started.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Commissioner Cummings, your thoughts?
My question, Mr. Chair, is there a mechanism where we can look at the 45 and maybe choose the top, whatever, for interviews? I guess you're training us, is it the interviews or the, is it the interviews
The
that you?
censoring process
It's on
that we
now.
have,
You're
Mark.
good. Oh, no.
no.
No, it's fine, it's fine.
Look at the green.
Yeah, it's
Red eye
on.
can't see it.
Yeah, I
It's
know.
So,
My question is though, is it this step that you're talking about training us on today, is it the interviews that we would be conducting, or is there another step where we could break down that 45 to the most qualified?
Mr. Granger, you're recognized.
so there's 2 or 3 things that need to be decided today, and that will be done. The last one is going to be the discussion about the interviews. And we will have training on the interviews the first day of the interviews, the hour before they start. And we will be proposing a means by which to do that interview process that I think will lead us to the best. So that's the interviews. The next stage that Ms. McPhail is going to talk about is this grid and how y'all will evaluate this based on what was in the job description. And the first thing is, what do you get? So we can send, and it's public record, all 160, give or take, files, if you'd like, just for you to see. We can send any number you want. We can also send, besides those, we can send them in an order of, these are how we ranked them, in the order we ranked them. We can show you what numbers we ranked, or we can give you blind copies, just the top 45, so that you can rank them on your own, or the top 20 or the top 15 or whatever number you all agree to. So that's kind of the first decision, is How many do you want? And do you want to see how we scored them?
Mr. Mitchell,
Mr. Chairman, when Mr. O'Brien said 29, I was like, where did he pull that number? Now I know where you pulled the number on this one. For me, what would make me comfortable is I am not I don't mind looking at the 16 because the 16 who received a 1, it means that one of you didn't think they were qualified at all. One of you were like, maybe. I don't really, I wouldn't mind looking at them, but I think to Mr. O'Brien's point, we had 166 applications. Many of those were people who weren't that interested in this job. They didn't take the second step. But if we're looking at 29 of them, so, somewhere in the neighborhood of 16, 17%, I can't do them. I'll leave that to the principal to tell me just how far off I am, but somewhere in that ballpark, we're taking a good look at good applications. And this is a process I've gone through countless times in my life. So I am comfortable that if you didn't make it into the final 29, again, there may be some extenuating circumstances, and I definitely think we should leave that open for anyone who feels like they weren't heard or they didn't get the email or whatever. I don't want to be the judge on that, but I would like to leave that open. But I would like to look personally at the 29. I don't care I do care what your opinion was, but I am perfectly comfortable looking at 29 of them, knowing that at a minimum, each of you believed that they came close to meeting the minimum qualifications.
so maybe I can offer a suggestion, see what you think.
Yes, sir.
So I would like to know personally the ones that you thought were highly qualified or qualified. The 29 is less daunting to me than 46, certainly. But the 17 is what I think is probably our most likely. But then on top of it, I wonder if we couldn't give each of the committee members a privilege to add, I don't know, 1, 3, 5 additional people that as they're going through the resume, they see something. And then maybe, because remember what we're doing, the first cut is the people that we then individually score. And so what we're really doing now is limiting ourselves, because as a matter of human nature, I don't know, thinking about panning for gold, it's always the next pan that we have the most faith in, And when in fact it's the best pan is what we're looking for. And so I hate to overwhelm ourselves with numbers that's going to detract from our ability to really focus on the people who are the best qualified. So what I would suggest is that for me personally, I want to know the ones that you guys thought were qualified and highly qualified. And then obviously by process elimination, we'll know the people that you thought were somewhat qualified. And so I would like to see your rankings, and I would highly recommend that we limit it to the 29 with maybe, a privilege of the commissioners if you want to look at the full 166 and pull out 1 or 3 or 5 or something like that and ask that they be scored as well. Maybe that's a way to do it. I don't know. Ted, what do you think? I'm making things up as I go along. Free associating, always dangerous.
Oh,
You're
You're good.
Okay. This is my first time doing this process, although I hire a lot of people, but not like this. And this is quite fancy, but I do trust this process. So I feel like you whittled it down, and I would not want to do all of them. And I would go with the 29 as well. We're looking for creme de la creme at this point. We want the best. So I feel like we have a good group of the best. We just have to figure it out from a smaller group. That's what I would.
I would. No comment.
So
So this, so the 29, so
Your microphone, Judge.
Mr. Mitchell, you're recognized.
thank you, Mr. Chair. I do. I like 29. I can read 29 cover letters. I can flip through a resume pretty quickly. I know what the criteria that the full board voted on. I'll review it. I don't have to do all 29 at one setting, but I can go through. And my guess is that I'm probably going to find that my top 17 match what you see as qualified or highly qualified. You can put it there. I'm just telling you, I'm going to review those 29, and I'm going to, because I remember the day that we made the determination as to what kind of degrees. And there were a lot of points that were made by members of the council that I thought were legitimate. And that is, this is not an easy job to put into simple parameters. It just isn't. And so I realized that sports management or sports medicine was not one of the degrees but I don't know if there's a.
We got one.
We did. Okay. By the way, he or she, but that would be a 1, that's a questionable. So that's why I'm like, I want to see that. And when we get to actually interview people, by the way, if you can't articulate why you want this job using the written English language, I don't think you're qualified for this job. That's me.
Yep.
So convince me on paper, and then I want to hear you, but that's your first shot, because when it comes to writing a grant, you have to have the ability to communicate through the written word. So I like 29. And again, I love the idea of giving each one of us personal privilege if we look through. And by the way, any of the applications.
Yes, with the 29 though, I would request that they are identified by the categories of highly qualified, qualified, and somewhat qualified.
Good. Commissioner Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also support your position, Judge Surstrom. I just want to commend our staff for the work that they've done so far after they explained their process of evaluation, step 1 and step 2. I feel like, of course, they clearly use objective criteria, totally non-subjective. And I feel good about the 29 that we have. I feel good about the ranking, Your Honor, and I would certainly support a position for us, support a motion. And as a matter of fact, I'll make that motion.
All right.
That we review the 29 applications as indicated with specifications, as Ms. O'Brien indicated, whether qualified or not qualified, pursuant to staff recommendation, with also leeway for each member to submit, I believe you said three additional potential applicants who might not be among that 29.
All right, 29 plus them.
I'll second that motion, and for discussion purposes.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just also like to ask Commissioner Cummings, and it's okay if you don't want to put it in your motion, but at least in my packet, I would like to see those who needed prompting by Mr. Granger or Ms. McPhail. If I just want to know, did they need prompting?
And the way I'm looking at it is you can look at any of them, any of the 166 that we got, if that's what you want to do.
Right.
So is there a problem with doing it that way or?
So we don't actually have packets for all 166 because some of them just clicked a button and
So
so
it
their
has
name
to
was
be-
submitted. So it's the 90, technically we have 93
The 93.
packets. 2 of them that we disqualified because they did not submit the cover letter as well. If there is a particular name, I can do screenshots directly from the apps. If there's those that you would like, and I can certainly start working on that so that we have them. If that's the will of the group.
So the 93 then is they have to have at least submitted a complete application.
My request of Commissioner Cummings had nothing to do with the 93. It was really just the 29.
Okay.
That if any of those 29, I would just like to know from a background. Again, it doesn't have to be part of the motion, but I would personally like when I'm reviewing those 29 to know whether or not I'm not eliminating somebody. I'd like to know whether they needed help.
Commissioner Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't agree with that friendly amendment. And on top of that, I really think it would be highly prejudicial to go behind what we have and ask who was prompted, who wasn't. I mean, we all have personal problems. COVID is running rapid. You know, we take care of elderly parents. There are many reasons why people might need prompting, and I really wouldn't want that to prejudice any one of our applicants, because we don't know the conditions that they were facing at the time they were applying. So I believe as committee members, any one of us can call Mr. Granger and look at this application or that application. And I think if we want to do that from a personal standpoint, we can. But I just don't I don't want it to be part of the motion, number one. And number two, I just don't want us to use that against any applicant.
Mr. Chair, my second still it still stands. I second the commissioner's motion, and I will just ask that all 29. I'd like to know what any correspondence you had between the 29, just for me, but
Fair
not as
enough.
part of the motion.
Any discussion on the motion? Principal Connor.
But does that make it more subjective when you have that choice? That's my question. If you know this, would it change your score?
Well,
And that takes out the objectivity of.
Yeah, well, I think I would like to see it because one of the criteria that we are looking at is planning. This application, by the way, was out on the street for a month. And I get the fact that there's COVID, and I respect your position, Commissioner. This is such an incredibly important job. And it is a job that we have advertised somewhere between $90,000 and $125,000 a year. I just want to know if, yes, it might prejudice me because it's real life experience of how good they are at planning. So, yeah, it's a good question. And
Yeah, I just would want it to be an objective process. And that puts a level of subjectivity to it when you're judging them based on they might have forgotten whatever. We don't know their circumstances. It could have been a computer glitch. I don't know.
Right. Well, that's why I'm saying if they did not submit, if they were one of the 166 who just submitted a resume, we disqualified them. We got it down to 93 by disqualifying them. And then the 2 who didn't provide a cover letter, we disqualified them. That to me is a very fair process. We gave directions and I just would like to see it for the 29.
Mr. O'Brien.
Just a little bit of experience in this process. You know, in my organization, we employ 5,000-6,000 people, and we go through a lot of hiring, as you can imagine, at all different levels. And at a certain level, we do engage in a group-wide process. And the reason why we do this is because we're looking for people to bring different perspectives, and each of us brings a different viewpoint of what's important, what's not important. And what we're trying to do is make sure that we don't walk into the process with blinders on. We want everybody to bring their perspective. So my response would be, just through my experience, let every member of this process bring their experience and their approach. Each of us are going to see something that's more important than the other. If planning is highly important to one member, if experience is more important to the other, those are the things that we need to recognize that will help us to achieve what we want to achieve, which is really to identify the best candidate. So I think actually it's good to allow each of us to view this from our own perspective and try not to homogenize it into one single category, one single approach, because if we do that, we're going to miss some things. So that's just my voice of experience.
Excellent. Thanks so much. All right. So there's a motion and a second, and the motion is 29 plus 3, 29 plus up to 3. And we don't have to come up with an additional 3. It's the ability to come up with an additional 3 if we want to. You can look at the other applicants if you, or look at the applicants that had to get pulled back in with the correspondence. And I say that, maybe that has to do with this. Maybe we're jumping the gun, but we'll talk about that in the scoring process. So
Point of clarification.
Mr. Granger.
So just to make sure, if you all would like, all the names are posted on our website right now. We can send you all 90, so you have all of their folders, and we can identify those top 29. So then you look at those if you would like to peruse or anything, but or 29. Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah.
45.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So off we go, and there's a motion and a second. Any objection? We'll show the motion carry. Excellent. Thank you, Commissioner Cummings, for the motion. Excellent. Now what are we doing? Ted, help us. Or Polly, either one.
So our next steps, based on the vote that just took place, you will receive a personalized invitation to a drive. That will contain, based on our conversation, 3 folders. One would be all the 45. I'm going to go back here. So in the 46, there will be a folder in there that has all of them, should that be what you choose to look. If you don't want to look in that folder, you don't have to. You'll also get just the 45 broken down by the ranking category. So within the past, if you will, you'll see that. You'll also see one folder that will be the 2 that were eliminated that I described, the 2 that took us from 93 to 91. So you'll have access to all of that should you choose to look into your zip drive and peruse it that way. You'll also receive a copy of this document. And so if you go on to page 5, this is kind of describing this document. It's an Excel spreadsheet. You can input it directly there. You can download it and do whatever you want. The goal here is for you to, on those 29 that will be identified, to complete an objective review where you're scoring 1 to 5 on each of these domains based on what you read.
Judge?
You're recognized, Mr. O'Brien.
I understand the scoring platform and the 5 categories that we'll be scoring. And I get the 1 to 5 scale. I get that. The 5 come from the position description, the job description. But the one thing that isn't completely captured in these 5 domains is experience. And we do have another section of experience. Is there a reason why we didn't add a 6th column for experience?
Yes, sir. Sorry.
You're recognized, Ms. McPhail.
So in the next step in the process for the interviews, that 3rd page of that position description that you're referring to, that's the basis for the question frames that we are creating for the interview process.
Okay, so your expectation is that that's going to be addressed in the interview process,
Yes, sir.
not a part of this scoring process.
Yes, sir.
All right, Mr. Granger.
Additional categories can be added, obviously, at the committee's discretion. But the question would be, the job descriptions describe each of those. The only experience that's described in the job description is that which is in the qualifications.
Right.
So is not experience a component of every one of those, though? In other words,
No, that's,
100% of my job has been in planning, and I've had this job for an hour. Do you know what I mean? So I mean, when you're deciding whether you get 5 for planning, wouldn't planning experience be part of that? Mr. O'Brien, go ahead. I'm thick.
to a large degree, yes, but to some degree, no, because there's a lot to be said about communication and engagement in this. And there is a piece of that in the planning process and the board relations, but there's also a broader piece as it relates to colleague relations that's not captured in this. I mean, we're talking about hiring the staff, engaging with colleagues and working across communities. That's not necessarily going to be seen in board relations or in the other categories. So that's the piece of it, because this is a community position. This is going to engage with the community in a very large way and in a very granular way with its colleagues, its employees. And that's not necessarily captured in those 5 domains. And that's why experience, I think, does weigh heavily in the interview process, absolutely. And that should be something that we really target and hone in on. But I think there is an experience component that also should be in this scoring process on the front end. And if we miss it, we may be not recognizing the value of experience in narrowing that field down.
We want to add a 6th category?
That would be my recommendation.
All right, so there's a motion to add a 6th category of experience. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and second. Discussion.
Yeah,
Mr. Mitchell.
I don't think, Mr. Chair, I love the idea. I don't, especially Mark, as you laid it out, it isn't necessarily experience. That's the only thing. I kept thinking, what's the word? But I'll tell you this, if it's experience is the 6th column, so the total is 30 points that each applicant can get. For me, I'm using it almost as across all 5 of these sections.
Right.
So
Quality and quantity.
yeah, so I love the idea of including it. I really do.
Mr. O'Brien.
I am not necessarily the best wordsmith, and I'll admit that. So if there's a better term, community engagement, or but I'm open to, but I think you understand what I'm trying to capture.
I do.
Yeah. So experience is just the term that I pulled
It's
from the
almost as though
job
it's
description.
a wild card. I don't even know how to, I mean, I love the idea though.
It's tough because there's breadth of experience, which is a diversity of experience. There's length of experience, which is longevity. There's quality of experience. It's a really important value across all domains. So I think a 6th category of experience, I think we know what we're talking about.
Yeah. And you know what, Mr. Chair, the nice thing is, and this goes back to what Mr. O'Brien said, we all are going to approach this from a slightly different perspective.
Right.
That category will probably be the most unique to each one of us individually. But I do think that we all know what you're referring to, and I completely agree with it.
All right, so moved and second, experience, Ms. McPhail?
Just a point of clarification, in the definition of that category in terms of how we're to judge, is it to reference that 6th category as it appears in the position description, or is it in fact intended to be more like the wild card in which we're not going to define it?
Let's see.
Sorry, as you're perusing that, one of the comments that we actually as staff discussed was, is it communications? And in reviewing things on paper, there is some aspects that are lost in that, in terms of when you look at the position description and you're submitting your resume, how do you capture some of that relationship-based
I mean, if you look at page 8, professional experience, I mean, I think that pretty much captures it. Do you think?
Yeah.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes, I mean, it goes to everything from cultural competence to business acumen to strong relationship builder. I mean, I think it just, it's an amalgamation of issues. It's not one singular experience piece.
These are qualities that you achieve from a lifetime of commitment, really.
Absolutely.
So I would reference back to that definition. Everybody feel? the
Thank
same?
you.
All right.
Mr. Chair, the A through I, is that what you're?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay, yes.
Yes, sir.
Good.
All right, so motioned and second. Any further discussion? Any objection? So we'll show that carries. We've added a sixth domain of experience. Mr. Granger or Ms. McPhail, whoever's talking now, you're recognized.
I think I'm officially done.
My other goal was to be a carnival barker. Mr. Granger, whenever you're ready.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Judge. So we'll move on to the interviews now. So we've talked about the applications, what you're going to get. We've talked about scoring them and keep that page together. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. McPhail, because I'm not sure you got there, but you're going to get 3 files, one of which will be the scoring document, and you'll add each name in order.
The names will be, the
will
29
already
names
be
will be
there.
already on there in alphabetical order.
And the rest of the sheet will be blank for you to fill in. Then you'll get other files, but we break down the top 29 then into a separate file that says top 29?
So the objective when we come back for our next meeting is that each of you would have completed that document, added your additional names of up to 3, submitted that back to staff in advance of the meeting, and then come to the meeting with your top 10 of who you'd like to put forward. And at that meeting is when we will combine each of you having your top 10 and hopefully come to who we're going to interview.
So do we need a deadline for the 3, for the commissioners to add their additions, if there are any?
Yes, sir. It's 2 business days before our next meeting. So that would be September 6th.
And that's on the timeline we'll be talking about in a little bit.
I know, but the 3 that the council members might add, we're going to have to back that out in time for those to go to all the other council members to be scored, right?
Correct. So 48 hours before our meeting, we would submit any of those additional names. If you submit it earlier, fantastic. And then we'll share those 3 additional names to each of your peers.
I would just encourage people to submit them as early as possible to give us as much time as possible to scores.
These are the additional ones.
Yes, the additional ones, the 29.
And as a further clarification, when they get the scoring document, they get the resumes, the packets, and they'll be broken down into those. Will there be a packet in there that says top 29? Is that how they'll do it? I'm just
That's
wondering.
the score sheet.
I'm sorry?
The score sheet that you'll submit.
Oh, I see. So all the folders will be in alphabetical order, and you'll need to look at the score sheet, go down the alphabetical order and hit on the names. So there will be a lot of them that you won't be hitting on. I just wanted to make sure that it was in alphabetical order and they'd be scanning through them to hit each of the people that's going to be on the score sheet. Does that make sense?
No, we will know somehow which ones are the 29 that we need to score.
Correct. There's a folder of just the 29, but there will be another folder in your zip if you want to go look at all the others.
Got it. Okay.
I apologize for confusing the issue, Mr. Chair.
I stay confused. Yeah, Mr. O'Brien.
But just a clarification, we're not scoring these prior to the next meeting. We're just adding additional names if we had determined we want to add additional names to the list.
We're scoring them
So we are scoring them. So how are we identifying who are the additional members?
because
that we're scoring?
once the deadline passes, because I don't think 48 hours is probably, I think that's not enough time. I think
We can amend that.
we'll figure it out, but because they're going to have to let us know. They're going to have to send us out an email that says score these 3 additional names or whatever.
So we need to score them have them scored and identify our top 10 by what date?
June 6th, 48 hours before our next meeting.
Which is September 6th.
September 8th, sorry, did I say June? My apologies.
Yeah.
September 8th is our next meeting at 3:30.
We don't have much time.
And
We need
so
the same. Yeah.
that is correct.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mitchell.
So is it the 5th is, I think, Labor Day? Is it?
Yes, I believe so.
6th is-
We can clearly adjust
Whatever.
the,
Well, so the top 10 thing, Like I watch David Letterman and I'm a fan of the top 10 list, but I also think that's kind of arbitrary because I may have an 11. What I'd like everybody to consider is maybe of the 29, those we would like to interview. Just and maybe much like the two of you gave, grades, maybe
Up or down?
if 3 of the 5 of us say interview, that could be 8, it could be 11. 10 is,
Arbitrary.
It is. And so I would just like maybe everybody to consider that of if 3 of the 5 of us say, I'd like to hear them in person, I'd like to meet them, I'd like to, ask them questions that.
So, Mr. O'Brien, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I have a thought about it. Interview, don't interview is like because we're going to score them, they're going to get a numerical score from person to last to person to first. If we say a number, then we know we're going to have a specific number that's interviewed based on just straight on the score. If we also have each person give a interview, don't interview, adding the 7th category, interview, don't interview, then that would give us the possibility of avoiding that arbitrary cutoff. And then you have, the big danger is that we have a bunch of people who say interview, and then we end up interviewing 35.
Yeah.
But Mr. Bryant.
Here's what I would suggest, and it's a process, a scoring system that just serves as a guideline. Let's say we identify our top 10, we prioritize those top 10. Number 1 gets 10 points, going all the way down to 10, which would get 1 point. We aggregate those scores, we identify and score them, and see if that is the list that we want to interview. But that doesn't mean the top 5 we necessarily have to interview, or it limits us. We can actually look at that and say, yeah, we feel good about these top 5, but we may want to look at it and say, well, we really also like number 7 and move it up. But if at least we have a scoring mechanism and then hold out from that and not say the scoring mechanism necessarily defines who we interview, but allows us to create a ranking, and then we can come back and identify who we're going to interview.
So if we are great, if we are giving those 29, maybe more, but let's just say it's 29.
We're only going to score 10.
Right. Nobody wants to add anybody else. We score all 29 of those, giving them 30 points. There are natural cuts in life. And all I'm saying is that the natural cut might be 7, it might be 12.
Yeah.
And I don't want to give you my top 10 because there might be 11 that are really good. And 10 and 11, 9, 10 and 11 all get the same score.
But likely your top 3 are going to, your 10 or 11, you're going to have a top 3 out of that 10 or 11.
Right. So
And you're not going to interview all 11 people.
no, it is, but what I would like to see is what our combined scores are.
Yeah.
Yes,
So each person's going to get, up to 150 points.
I think we are reinventing the wheel is what I expect.
I think I was not clear in describing your top choices. I said, identify your top 10. You don't give that to us. That's what you're going to come to the meeting, because the process at the meeting on September 8th at 3:30 is to do exactly what you just described by turning in your score sheet 48 hours in advance. What that does is we then combine it similar to how we did with our 1, 2s and our 0, 1s and 2s, so that then you see those natural delineation, but bring your notes and know who your top choices were,
Okay.
whatever that means.
Okay,
So then when you see it.
Yes.
So we're all just bringing our list. We're not
Yes.
scoring. We're not ranking or scoring them.
Yeah.
Right, but and however you interpret that as, these are the people that I'd like to interview or that are at my top list, because what gets published in the packet is going to be the ranking of those top 29 and any additionals that are the combined scores. So it could be that your number 1 on your list, then at your combined score is like 15.
Right.
But you might want to then come to this meeting to advocate, no.
Yep.
And that's what will happen at that meeting.
And candidly, for Judge, you've said this at a couple of the last meetings, and that is where you said how proud you are of this group. I may have somebody ranked number 15, but Commissioner Cummings, you may have that person ranked number 2. And I'd like to hear.
Right, exactly.
That may change my mind, and I would. I mean, that's what this is about to me as a group. I want to hear what the 4 of you.
If we would, turns out we agree with you. Go ahead.
Yep. All right.
Thank
So
you,
it is
Paul.
in a top 10.
Yeah.
And I'll amend the instructions to just say top choices so that you have that information in your
Just
back
our
pocket.
29 ranked how we have them ranked.
And then after we identify the top ones that we interview, that's when we go into our objective selection interview process, which Mr. Granger will talk about and is briefly outlined on page 11.
Mr. Granger, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Holly and I spent a bunch of time delving into how this interview process might best take place in order to gravitate to the best possible applicants. We looked at a lot of different processes, a lot of different ways people do it, et cetera. I generated 2 pages of questions that most interviews have that explain the rationale behind each of your career moves. Looking back in the last 5 years of your career, what's the highlight? What century was the French Revolution in? And I have to tell you, all of the things that we saw were boring, meaningless questions that were going to result in boring, meaningless answers. So a couple of months ago, when I first got this job, I sat down with Jim Croteau, who helped us with the strategic plan in a very fundamental way. And he and I began talking about this. On page 11 of your handout, Mr. Croteau is very experienced and has done this a lot over his career in using an objective selection interview process. And rather than all these questions that say, tell us, this, he is developing questions based on each of the criteria of the qualifications in our in the job description, that he will be able to ask questions about those. And I think all of the council members could also do that. But with his training, he's trained to ask the follow-up and then the next follow-up to get to really the heart of the issue. I've been so impressed in discussing this process with him in terms of really getting to situational awareness and experience and expertise and past performance, et cetera, that I'm prepared to enter into a $2,400 contract with him where he will attend all of the meetings. He will train each of you in the process, and he will actually facilitate the questioning to make sure that every applicant is handled identically for a lot of reasons. Also, because he can delve into the questions. Your responsibilities will be to evaluate those answers and then put your heads together to say, okay, here's what we heard from these folks. And I wanted to run that by you today to make sure that you all are comfortable with that. One of the reasons why, besides the fact, I think regardless of the timing, I'm convinced this is the best way to go, given what we've seen. But I apologize at the beginning of the meeting for hassling y'all and your schedulers for all the time I've had to call them back and cancel meetings and set them up. As I mentioned, I think earlier, if this interview process doesn't go as we hope, then we're into December, late November and December, and into the new year for hiring potentially. We have, with the time that we have, which was the only time that all of you could get together, are what is going to be on the, we'll show you on the timeline in a minute. What it allows for, Mr. Croteau says that it takes about an hour to do one of these interviews. He believes he can do them in about 50 minutes, which leaves room. We have about, I believe it's 7 hours which leaves room for 1 hour of training and 6 interviews. He can shorten that up perhaps to 45 minutes and squeeze another interview in. And when the rankings come back, if you all believe that you need to interview 10 people, then we're going to have to figure out how to make that happen later on. But it would be my hope that at the next meeting, you'll be able to generate it down to 6 or 7. We can fit it in the time frame because that fits the first interviews, 2 days for the first interviews, 6 hours, 7 hours, and 4 hours for the second interviews if you get it down to 2 or 3. And then the decision-making process. So that's kind of our thinking. Obviously, the process is not well known at this point. Y'all may want to interview 15 people. You may only end up deciding to interview 2 people. So we'll have to play that by ear as we go. But I wanted to number one, let you know about the contract that I'm prepared to enter and make sure that y'all are comfortable with that.
Let me ask a question about that, Ted. So I don't know if you guys remember Mr. Croteau or not.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody remembers
Public
him?
care.
I've worked with him.
And
No, I don't.
so he's been to a couple of the meetings. He's given public comments. He came to lots of the planning committee meetings. But remind us what is, I know he's a PhD. What is his background a little bit, Ted? Do you know?
Ooh, I don't have it with me. He was 35 years with the school system. He was an assistant superintendent one time, an interim superintendent. He had many jobs. One of his jobs was HR, which is where he learned this. He's also was the interim executive director at Second Harvest for a while, and he's held a number of other positions like that.
He headed up elder care services for a while.
Yeah.
All,
So, I started this meeting by telling you, to me, that the 2 most important things that we as a board have to do is hire an executive director and get this ITN out on the street successfully. The governor and cabinet pick an insurance commissioner. They don't need somebody asking the interview questions. I just sit there and a financial commissioner. And I appreciate the fact that, I would love, it's not that I'm objecting to entering into a contract with someone who can help us be better interviewers, but especially with someone who, I don't mind being 4-1 on this. I don't want to turn over my responsibility to hire an executive director to someone else, just because, and again, I'd love to hear his ideas for questions, but I don't want to limit, I don't want to limit me to questions that he's posing, because Mr. Granger, as I've shared with you, I don't want this to be scripted. And I very much want, I want the ability to be free as a board member to ask whatever question I want. And again, I certainly have no problem being trained to make sure that we stay within the guidelines of the applications themselves. I'm not going to ask their favorite color. Having said that, the governor, the CFO, the attorney general, and the agriculture commissioner all come from very different points of view and are able to hire an insurance commissioner who regulates a very important industry in our state. And they do it in a public meeting, and they do it without someone doing the questions for them. That's just my.
Mr. O'Brien?
So I am a little confused. So explain to me again, what is the potential role or the proposed role of Jim? Is it to train us, or is it to actually conduct the interview? Because I think that is our role, to conduct the interview.
It can be either way. When we first started it, we were saying each of the committee members would get a question. As we talked about it more, particularly, in terms of the flexibility and not being scripted, in his opinion, it's very important that every candidate be given the same questions consistently. to eliminate the bias and other things that can happen intentionally or unintentionally in one of these meetings.
So with that in mind, I agree that there's some value in uniformity. You don't want to ask one candidate a bunch of softball questions and really just because they're likable, and then hone in really hard on another one and ask critical questions that are much more difficult to address. We need to have uniformity. I can see Mr. Croteau playing a role in providing some training, providing some suggested questions that would allow us to have uniformity. But I do think that as long as we as a group identify what those questions are, having us to conduct the questions and answers, making sure that all of those, that if we have 4 or 5 key questions that we think are critical, and I think that might be part of the training, what are the critical questions that we want to make sure get answered by all 4 candidates? That's fine. I don't think it's the role of Jim to actually conduct the questioning. I think that's our job.
So maybe have him train us and he can talk to us directly, and we can, if he convinces us that there's a good reason for him to ask questions, then that's just something that he can convince us of. But the training, I think are we all in agreement about the training?
Yes.
I think the one thing that he can help us do is identify what are those, at least that narrow set of questions we want to get across to every single candidate. I mean, if we can do that and say, okay, here are the 4 questions we are absolutely going to ask for every single one. If you can help us do that, I think that provides value.
Mr. Mitchell, Commissioner Cummings.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Just for clarification, is it suggested that Mr. Croteau would have the primary role with the questions, but the committee would still be available to ask follow-up questions? Or we're concerned more about consistency with each candidate that comes before us being allowed to respond to the same question?
Are we watching Jim Croteau do interviews, or are we participating?
As I discussed it with him, and he can articulate it better than I, yes.
Yes, what?
Yes, he would be conducting the interviews. And the reason for that is because he has such experience asking the follow-up questions. It's easy to ask the question. Knowing and having 20 years or whatever your experience of what's the follow-up that's going to get to the really nitty-gritty of this. And to that answer, what's the follow-up to that? It seems to make a big difference. He has the questions that are pretty much drafted up at this point. He's refining them. The other issue is because of all the qualifications that are required in the job description, touching on all of those in experiential ways to find out what a person would do and how they've done it in the past, and driving a little bit deeper within the time frame that we have for an hour interview is also takes some,
I will tell you, I certainly respect and appreciate Jim and his experience. Any help he can get us to identify some uniformity of questions that will come across to all candidates, great. But at the end of the day, we're going to be held accountable for who that person is, what recommendations we bring to the full committee. Not Jim. I think we need to feel comfortable with the questions asked and the follow-up questions. I think it's us we're going to be responsible for picking this person, making sure that they do their job and do it well. And hopefully we understand this role better than he would. Mm-hmm. So we know what things we want to see in a candidate. And so with that perspective, I think that we're probably better suited to understand what follow-up questions to pose as these things are answered. Okay. So my very strong belief is that yes, uniformity and a set of questions to come across all candidates, but we should be the ones collectively interviewing the candidates, not Mr. Croteau.
Mr. Mitchell.
Mr. Chair, just a suggestion, kind of following up on Mr. O'Brien's comments. Maybe what we do is we take Mr. Croteau, is that his name? Mr. Croteau's, the questions that he is working on, and we provide that, let's say, for argument's sake, that there are 6 candidates that between the 5 of us, we would like to interview. We provide those questions to each one of them
In advance.
in advance, and they stand at the podium or wherever, and we give them a set amount of time to answer those questions, much like this is almost like a verbal cover letter. And they sort of lay that out as they're making the argument as to why they would be the best executive director. You know?
I kind of like the idea too, because
Yeah.
one of the things that you got to get, people have got to they either bring to the table or they got to get their head around in a big hurry is open meetings. And you're standing at the podium because that's how you got to do it. Or
Yep.
you're on the microphone because that's how you got to do it. And you got to be prepared for the meeting and you can't be intimidated by it. That's the way
Right.
we've got to operate. I like it.
Just,
Is Commissioner Cummings?
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I sort of feel like Mr. O'Brien. I also have worked with Mr. Cruteau, long time in the school system, and he and I worked before on a nonprofit board for years. He's a highly respected individual in the Tallahassee community, and I certainly trust him, and I trust his integrity, but I trust him as far as training us on the type, the interviews that we need to conduct, the type follow-up questions, what have you. So I would be in favor of, I guess, contracting with him to assist us, to train us, if that's what you're recommending. But I also feel that the ultimate responsibility is on the Children's Services Council. I don't feel comfortable with dedicating our responsibility to select an executive director, to him contractually or otherwise. But I certainly do believe that he could assist us in that interviewing process to make sure it's fair and equitable to each candidate that, that comes before us, that perhaps they get the same question, maybe same follow-up question, that type thing.
And we're going to want him, and it's the same amount of money too, I think, because we're going to want him here for the interviews in case he needs to advise us, in case he needs to make suggestions on the fly. I mean, he, as an additional, dedicated staff person. Mr. O'Brien?
I like Paul's comments and his approach. I think the one thing that he can help us do, even if it could be some training, but if he can help us identify, or if he can suggest and we can evaluate and identify questions in advance that we submit to the candidates and have them answer at the podium, that gives uniformity, that allows us to basically make sure that the questions are appropriate for what we're looking to help us identify a candidate. I think that would be something you could take back to Mr. Cruteau that I think would be very helpful.
Mr. Cruteau is going to be at our first meeting, at the council's first meeting for the first interviews, and the first hour is in the training is going to be explaining the questions, going over the questions, et cetera. So that will be a great time for him to have the discussion with you about roles and responsibilities, who's going to ask what questions, et cetera. I have to say, have heartburn with the suggestion of giving the questions out in advance. I think my personal opinion, this council needs somebody who can think on their feet, can respond quickly and appropriately to questions, can articulate answers to perhaps challenging and difficult questions on the cuff, and be able to think spontaneously and deeply about issues. And I think asking people to make presentations on the questions that are pre-given to them takes all of that out of the mix.
Because it was my idea, I'll defend it. Here's the thing. I appreciate that. I'm not saying dedicate the entire period of time to those. This is an opportunity for them to make a public presentation, something that they are going to do on a daily basis as executive director. The follow-up questions, again, I'm looking at a principal of a school, a lawyer, a man who runs a large medical facility, a hospital, a judge, and a guy who's run 3 agencies. I promise you, we're good at asking some follow-up questions that will challenge them and make them think on their feet. I really feel good about him coming up with like the beginning questions, like, and giving each one of the finalists, the candidates, an opportunity to sort of prioritize where they would like to go. Because there's a portion of that each one of us is going to evaluate. We know what the 4 or 5 questions that Jim is suggesting. We give it to them. They get 20 minutes to speak to them, and then based on their how they present, we can follow up with any questions that that are of interest to us. And again, no offense to Mr. Cruteau, who I am sure is an impressive man. I've never met the man, so I feel a little bit badly. It has nothing to do with him. It has everything to do with my responsibility as a board member, and going back to the 2 points I made of, the needs assessment and the executive director. That will guide us for 10 years. And that to me is the most important thing.
And maybe Ted, with understanding that we've, changed the exam in the middle of the exam for Mr. Cruteau, maybe he can write questions that are appropriate for that, so that we're testing both the presentation ability and the ability to think on their feet and respond to
A mix. Answer and then.
So just as a point, so that we can work with him, he's in France right now. If we have 50 minutes.
I'd like to be in France right
now. Yeah. If we have 50 minutes per candidate, including questions and answers and a presentation, is there an amount of time that I should let him know that he should plan on for the presentations?
We're losing one.
Yeah.
That's okay. Thank you so much. He's got a very good reason he's got to go.
Take care, Mark. Divvying up that 50 minutes between the questions that he's going to have and a presentation on 1 or 2 questions, is there an amount of time that you want to look at in terms of providing for the presentations so that he can plan on the training issue in terms of the other stuff?
15 minutes unprepared questions, something like that. What do you think?
But just point of clarification, Mr. Chair. Are we not only providing the questions to the applicants, but asking them to prepare presentations? It was, in my mind, I was thinking we would give them the questions in advance.
Yes, ma'am.
And just go down each question. One of the council members would ask them the question and not necessarily have them prepare a presentation on the question.
Well, I use the word presentation, but no, I just mean the question.
Just a spontaneous answer, but these are the questions in advance, right?
Yeah, they're not going to be doing a PowerPoint.
Okay.
Right, and just giving them an opportunity of 15 to 20 minutes to, hey, here are 5 questions that are important to the group that's interviewing you. We would like you to answer those 5 questions in your 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And that gives us an opportunity to see how well they do at doing a presentation. And then we can, do follow-up questions to any of the applicants that, that we would like.
Commissioner Cummings?
Yes, sir. And since it is open to the public, they would have the questions in advance, but I think we could basically go around the room and each committee person or each member of the council could ask them the question so that those looking online or those in the audience would know what the question is, rather than them having it there and just responding to question 1, 2, and 3. We give them the heads up on the question, but we just ask them the question during the interview. Is that the concept that we're thinking of?
No.
No, no.
I think that's the concept I think is what Mr. Mitchell did
No.
or was thinking of. Is
And I'm
presentation on a question or two and then individual questions for the rest of the
No,
time?
I'm modeling
okay, I'm
this
sorry.
after, so I'll do a better job of articulating it. I'm modeling it after how 4 statewide elected officials select an insurance commissioner. The people who are being interviewed at a public meeting, at a cabinet meeting, come up and they make a presentation. The presentation would be 15 to 20 minutes long, and the assignment would be, please answer these 4 or 5 questions, whatever the number is that Jim comes up with, that he thinks will get the ball rolling. Those 4 or 5 questions can be posted publicly. They can be on our website. They can be, a split screen of anybody watching. Here are the questions that the committee members ask the interviewees to be prepared or to give a presentation on. Then their presentation would end, and each one of us, just like the governor as chair, will look to the agriculture commissioner and say, Commissioner Freed, do you have any questions? Commissioner Freed asks questions. Then General Moody, CFO Petronas, and then the governor as chair asks questions last. At any point, anybody can, after everybody's had their first round of questions, they can do a follow-up question or it can end. And that's how I envision it. And it gives us an opportunity to see each one of these applicants live and in person and presenting to the community.
And we're not limited also, Commissioner Cummings, to the follow-up questions, also based on any of the resumes, or we can have, questions that Jim comes up in reserve that they're not prepared for. So I mean, it's a mix of them being able to show us what they can do when they're prepared for a question and what they can do on the fly. That's how I'm thinking.
Yes.
Well, my position, Judge Surstrom, it's not etched in stone. I'm just trying to get some clarification.
Yeah, me too.
On what we are proposing and the entire concept, so that we can be fair to the applicants, to the public, and to each one of us as members of the council. So if we're asking each one to do a 15-minute presentation on, say, 5 questions, right? Is that what we're saying? Perhaps, or whatever
That's what's being
Dr.
suggested.
Courteau,
Something like that.
Dr. Courteau recommends, we'll give them a time limit to do the presentation, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's what we're envisioning. And then the council members can do follow-up questions
Yes.
if they want to.
And honestly, if let's for argument's sake, we'll say it's 6 again. All 6 of them may have very diverse backgrounds. So I as a follow-up question, for example, I wouldn't ask Principal Connor the same question I asked you. Your background is very different. Like if I was interested in hearing about your background, I'd want to hear about where you went to law school and kind of that. I'd want to know what got you excited about kids in the first place and your craziness to walk in and lead, teachers and children. So that's why I think the flexibility for each one of us is good. But Mr. Courteau can give us a framework to get the candidates talking about their background and how it sort of answers those questions. Again, I don't know what the questions are that he has in mind, but I have no doubt that based on his background, he's good.
I think the difference is Mr. Courteau's process is objective, and that was the point. And the funny thing is I can relate because I think he probably was the one that developed it for Leon County Schools, because exactly what I've read here is exactly what happens, which is very different from your experience and from Mark's experience. I don't have a dog in the fight with this one because I haven't had many interviews, nor have I been on this side of it. But I'm very sensitive to the fact about making sure that this process is objective. And I kind of feel, I like the compromise of having both where they have the presentation and we have our time to ask questions. But I just want to make sure that everybody has the same
Level
level of,
playing field.
right. Very sensitive to that. So that's what I think his process, the initial process ensures that, where when we can start asking our own questions, it kind of changes it for everybody. And you're right, you wouldn't ask the same question of when you have different backgrounds. I totally get that, but I just want to make sure everyone has a fair opportunity to answer these questions.
Ms. McPhail?
In having the conversation and kind of reviewing this, I had an aha moment when we were talking about it. I have probably not interviewed nearly as many people, nor at the level that we're looking at. In the process, though, of kind of the normal questions that you ask to kind of get at their background, what the objective process does is not talk about, tell me what you've done. It's describe a scenario and how you handled it. And he gets to the core of solving an issue that's related to one of the key factors. So it's not necessarily about the format. I think that we can absolutely accommodate the council's and committee's request of part presentation, part interview, and that everybody gets their opportunity to ask the question. It's what questions are asked and how they're asked and what those follow-up questions are. That's the process that makes it objective. And that's the part that we'll have to dive into in terms of the training that keeps it completely objective and uniform so that you're able to get at the core of your competency to handle a particular issue that you're looking for. As opposed to, but there are those, I'm going to call them softball questions. That's a little bit, tell me why you're interested in this position. That is their opportunity to kind of forsell themselves. I think either you or Mr. O'Brien said a verbal cover letter, almost, that there are those that are built into the process, but it's the core of the objective selection is how you ask the question and what the specific questions are. And I think that we can accommodate the format that you're suggesting by keeping it to those core questions.
Principal comment?
And that's where I was going with that. And I think the questions that would be posed would be, what is the situation? That person would describe the task, the action that took place, and then what was the result of that process. That's what I think this gets at, rather than the question, well, why did you choose this as a...
Right. And it's really, really important when we say objective. We can't advantage one candidate over another. We can't ask questions to try and help somebody or hurt somebody else. No hatchet jobs. No, I mean, this is an opportunity to gain information about these people to make a decision based on the interview, not to advantage or disadvantage somebody. So Ted, I think you're disadvantaged in this because Mr. Croteau's not here. And because we haven't been trained yet. So here's what I'm going to propose. Ted hires Mr. Croteau for the $2,400. Mr. Croteau comes and trains us. And is he training us the day that we do the interviews or
The hour before the first interview.
the hour? So yeah, so if we do that, we're not going to be able to give him the questions in advance.
He's working on, he's got the questions pretty much done at this point. I can communicate with him and ask him what questions might be best for a presentation. Is that not what y'all were thinking, or?
Go ahead, Paul.
No, Commissioner, I saw your.
I'm just not getting it. I'm sorry.
No, I was just a little concerned, just search about being trained an hour before the interview. I mean, if we're going to hire him to assist us, I'm not sure that 1 hour before the interview is the best tactic we need to take at this point.
Yeah.
And honestly, I kind of feel like if Mr. Croteau was interested in become a member of the council, this is weird about me, I guess. And it isn't that I don't trust this gentleman. I am sure he's incredibly qualified, but
If we had another week.
there are 10 people on this council. And if you remember, the statute's clear. The 5 of them are, electeds and picked by those bodies. And then 5 are selected by the county commissioner or 15 who submit them to the governor. There's a process to get this really cool group of 10 people. And I don't want to consolidate it to Mr. Cruteau. No offense to him. I have questions I want to ask. And the objectivity that you guys have put into this process, getting us to the point where we're interviewing people, I so embrace, completely embrace. But when we get down to 3 or 4 candidates or 5 or 6, whatever it ends up being that we're interviewing, this is kind of like Mr. O'Brien's, 6th category. I don't. We're human beings. There is no objectivity.
And it's a relationship that we're in.
Yeah. So I don't care how we do it. I just don't. I'm uncomfortable turning my responsibility of selecting an executive director over to another individual.
I would just say that's not what it is. I think,
when you, Ted, with all due respect, when you are the person asking the questions, you dictate how things go. And I think it's going to go fine if he just, I think it'll go fine.
I think it'll go fine with or without him. I think what you've pointed out with this experience is true. I was trying to get to a more objective kind of positioning, so we were assured that every candidate was asked the same questions, which regardless of what profession you're in or whatever, get to your thinking ability, your rationalization, how you handle office management, finances, et cetera. If that's not the way the committee wants to go, and ask the personal questions or anything in whole or in part, I'm good with that.
Can I also add, I think it's not necessarily, I think that the issue is the compression of time into this idea of the training that we might get being the hour before, and then that's the part that feels rushed. To Mr. Mitchell's and Commissioner Cummings' point of this is one of the most important tasks that the committee will make. I think what I hear being proposed is that the training is removed from that day before or the hour before, and that it's conducted separately. So then what we have on our task or on kind of is figuring out when after the 8th and before the 20th, we can fit that training in.
Could we do it on the 8th? I mean, when we're bringing back our top list?
Fortunately, the calendars don't mesh. 3:30 is as early as everybody can get together. And the trim meeting's at 5:15.
Yes, Commissioner Cummings.
Thank you, Judge Surstrom. Let me see if I can say it this way. I don't believe in hiring Dr. Cruteau that we would be allowing him to make the selection of our executive director. I don't think it goes to that step. I think that we're all from various backgrounds. Many of us, we might be professionals, but we might not have ever had to interview for a position at this level. And I think it's important as a public body that we display that we are fair across the board to all the applicants. And in showing that we are fair, I think it's important that each applicant is basically asked the same question, being allowed to respond to the same questions. I think it's important that we, as members of this council, not show any favoritism or biasness against any of the applicants that we choose to interview. So having said that, Judge Surstrom, in the larger scheme of things, I don't have a problem with Dr. Cruteau assisting us so that we can reach that level. I think we want to be at a level that's above scrutiny. above criticism by the public for all the reasons I just pointed out. And I don't believe that we would be at a disadvantage in ultimately selecting the best executive director by virtue of Dr. Croteau assisting us in the questions and in the interviewing process. I think it would be a help to me, to be honest with you. So my only concern is how helpful will it be to me on the day of the interview? Okay.
Point well taken.
If he has some suggestions about questions for each applicant, I don't want to just see those the day of the interviews. If he wants to do some level of training as far as follow-up questions that's fair and unbiased, I need to see that prior to the day of the interview. So I support our chairperson in recommending that we secure Dr. Croteau's services, but in doing so, I want it to be beneficial to us early enough so that it can be helpful in the process.
It's a tough timeline.
Yeah, well, the question is really calendars. If the decision is to use Mr. Croteau in terms of providing some potential questions, in terms of training, in terms of helping everyone to help facilitate the speed with which these need to be done with the content that needs to be generated. Which again, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. It's not, and that's, we need the best person. We've checked the week of the 11th on everyone's calendars already, the week of the 11th and 13th. And there's no place where everybody's calendars jive. Now I'll see who might be if there's only one or two people that can't do it on a certain time and do it then. I guess my question for you would be, God, I hate to say this too, because everybody is working so hard and the FSU season is starting and FAMU, a Saturday morning or something along those lines.
I could do it on a Saturday morning. My marriage is intact, as far as I know.
So really, we're looking at securing 1.5 hours between September 8th and September 20th. So that would be, if you are looking at your calendar as I am, potentially Saturday, September 11th or Saturday, September 18th.
Well, and I will work with y'all to see if we can get it during the work week and see if any adjustments could be made to calendars, because I know that is the preference for a lot of reasons. But if we end up gravitating to a Saturday, I just want to throw that on the table.
All right.
So, Mr. Chair, thanks. Okay. We play Notre Dame on a Sunday, so that's on September 4th, or September 5th. I think September 11th might not be in good taste. Having said all that, maybe Mr. Croteau can do the training, 2 of us and then 3 of us. So it's 1 hour of training and we break it into, he does it twice. We all watch the trim
Video. I blame myself.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we did that separately. So I think if he could do that, may accommodate us. So, because I'm with Commissioner Cummings on this, you're going to train me. I need a little time to digest it. And we sort of need, he's going to be here for September 8th, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Right. So I think that's our opportunity to sort of provide him with input of questions. He can tell us sort of the questions he had in mind, and we can all come to an agreement. And then we do the training somewhere between the 8th and the 20th in 2 groups.
Right. So what is next? So Ted, hire Mr. Cruto and player to be named later. So excellent. So what is our next on our agenda?
The next is to review the timeline, which Holly already has up on the screen. So
So in your packet, on pages 12 and 13, it's also kind of detailed. And what we were just discussing is on September 20th, that would be amended and potentially could be dedicated entirely to doing the interviews, should we have more than 6 or 7. And that what we would add to that timeline is either a 1-part, 2-part training session with either part or the full committee. And all of those trainings will also be conducted in the sunshine, so they will all be publicly noticed as well. Based on the timeline, and yes, ma'am. Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought, did you have a question?
Oh, no, I was just
Go ahead.
September the 28th, what time?
September 28th is in the morning from 9 to, technically, the interviews would conclude at 12, and then we would reserve a portion of that time for then you to make the decision for who rises to the top. That will also be covered in the training that Mr. Cruto will provide.
9 to 12.
And then the last hour, 12 to 1, reserved for a committee meeting. So if it all jives well, and we were able to find over those 2 weeks, the 20th and the 28th, the interviews round 1, then the next step in the process is to identify those that would progress to interview round 2. And we've tentatively reserved October 4th for that round. Kind of the natural selection per Mr. Cruto is, say you interview 7, you usually will whittle it down to 3. If you interview 5, you whittle it down to 2. He says there's actual like mathematical science and proven stuff behind this. I'm going to believe him. So then we would progress, and on October 4th, there would be a round of interviews followed by that committee meeting to discuss who you would like to put forward to potentially to the full council to approve the final selection. If following this timeline works and on October 21st, you present that as a committee recommendation and the full council ratifies that selection, offering the position, giving them time to accept, provide professional notice, et cetera, gives us an anticipated start date right after Thanksgiving.
And Your Honor,
You're right.
and you're going to be sending out calendar invites on all these meetings within the next 24 hours?
Yes, the reason why we did not send them previously to this meeting was to ensure that the timeline jives with everything and everybody. The one that will be missing is the training one. That will come later. And it's my hope that all of these meetings will be right here in these chambers, and I will work with Ms. Goodman Taylor to make sure that the technology works better next time. Apologies.
Well, it's evidently working.
Mr. Cumming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there somewhere in here where we will be calling references for background checks?
Yes,
Do we do it
ma'am.
on the top 3, top 5? I don't.
Yes, so if you look through it in terms of background checks and references, once you identify who will be interviewing on the 8th, all of those individuals, whether it's 7, 10, 4, however many that is, we will be conducting a background check as well as checking their references.
Okay, but it's not on the scale. I just want to make sure I didn't miss it. It's not on here, right?
It's the 3rd item under September.
On the September 9th,
Yes, ma'am.
call candidates to schedule interviews,
Right underneath
The one
that.
below it.
conduct reference checks. So that will be, okay, that's what I wanted to see. So the reference checks will be on all of the applicants that we interview.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and at what point in the process do we as council members get feedback about those background checks?
They would be provided to you in it before the meeting and added to their file in essence.
Before the interviews?
Yes, ma'am. I don't have that clarified in the timeline, but I can add that to you and send the committee an updated with
So
that feedback.
Before the round one, it will be provided, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is a level 2 FDLE background check. Is that what we're performing?
I don't know the answer.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's what we're.
I think that's,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, I like,
Is that-
I'm on a background check.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're clarifying exactly what that means, but that's exactly, we will have an answer for you at the September 8th meeting definitively, but that is the way we are leaning.
So this, this is aggressive. I feel like we can probably do this. There is one thing though that I will, October 4th. So let's just say that we've got 2 candidates that we've got it boiled down to, right? We just want to interview those 2 candidates. And I very well may be ready on that day to make my choice. I would only ask that, and then again, I might not be. And I would only ask that we have 17 days between when we will be making a recommendation to the full council. Certainly, I want to give the other 5 members of the council a fair amount of time to kind of look through everything. Just I can't remember who it was. I'm sure Cummings, it may have been you, but somebody asked specifically, and I want to be able to see, and I don't blame them. So I would only ask that we might try to find a date after October 4th as a possibility in case we need it to give us a chance to digest what we're going to get 2 phenomenal candidates or 3 phenomenal. It's not going to be an easy choice. And I would love the opportunity to hear the other 4 members of the committee's opinion and then sleep on it. Because again, this is a big decision. It may be one person is just such a standout that we all look at one another and go, duh. Why was it back on August 24th, is that what today is, that we went through all this when it was so clear that this is the right person? But I have a funny feeling that it's going to come down to 2 or 3 really just quality human beings who will all 3 do a great job. And I would just like a little time to sleep on it if we need it. And I want to give each one of the 4 committee members that same ability. So maybe we find October, I'm not looking at the calendar, but it's 7th or.
Again, we've looked at almost all those dates before the 21st. And the calendars don't mesh, but we'll do the same thing as we're going to do for the other one and see if we can, at this one, the whole committee would need to be.
Yeah.
So it may have to be a Saturday morning, but I will work for I'll work for a weekday for that.
Yeah, and it's a short meeting, so that.
Excellent. All
Well,
right. So anything else on the timeline?
One of the reasons why we did have that window was in case we needed time, but also I think to your point that we want to make sure that the council meeting on the 21st, that all the council members have everything a full 7 days before, so that it's not like they're getting their meeting packet when they're walking in, that's their first exposure. So that was another reason for the extended period of time between the 4th and the 21st. But as Mr. Granger said, I think adding that tentative so that we can choose to roll right into it, or if it's the committee's will, we come back 5 days later or whatever that is. So we'll find that.
All right, excellent.
May I, yes, ask a question, sir? We've got a couple candidates in the top, at least in our ranking, that are out close to the West Coast.
That are what?
Close to the West Coast.
Oh.
And
West Coast of the United States.
yes.
There's a lot.
And
Pensacola.
yeah.
Okay.
And I guess I'm wondering, I had kind of thought that I would offer this, but I obviously hadn't talked with y'all about it. And it may not be something that, I don't know where everybody falls on this, but should the council be willing to pay their travel expenses out here for the interview and potentially 2 interviews, I guess? I'd want
So
to
is
know
the-
whether I should do that or not.
To me, if, and you might have noticed, I'm a little thrifty with other people's money. I certainly think, you haven't noticed that? I certainly think that if they are a finalist, if they're one of the 2 or 3, definitely. But if maybe well, I guess a Zoom call wouldn't be as, I have no problem with an airline ticket. So.
Commissioner Cummings?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I think that that's a decision that the full council would have to make. I don't think that's a decision that the committee can make. I certainly don't think we need to make it at this time, but I think it should come before the full council, Mr. Chairman.
When's our next council meeting?
That's right, I was just looking. for it.
September 23rd. After the first round of interviews. Sorry.
So yeah, so that's the problem, Commissioner, is that we won't have a council meeting before we do the interviews. So,
Or before the interview.
yeah.
So on September 8th, we'll know sort of who we want to interview.
Yes.
And I believe that Mr. Granger was given spending authority. So, would I prefer that the whole council vote on this? Yeah, but he has authority to spend money. So, I mean, we're entering into a contract for $2,400. So certainly we can, find a $600 round trip ticket for, there aren't that many of them. Right?
Can we defer the decision until our next meeting on the 8th?
That's what I would recommend.
Yeah,
Yes, sir. Yeah.
because we don't even know if one of them
Yeah,
falls into our category.
yeah, we might not want to interview them and then we don't have to make this difficult decision.
Right.
When I once judged a barbecue contest and said, I don't know who's going to win, but if I can get everybody in the same room, we can settle it. All right, so Ted, we'll defer until 9/8. Anything else on the timeline,
No, sir.
on the money on travel money? The problem is we're making a lot of decisions that for the first time, haven't set any
Just think
precedent.
about how much money we saved on a headhunting firm.
Lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ted did a heck of a job.
32%.
All right, so that's the timeline. So the timeline is approved. And that brings us to next meeting dates.
New for your resume.
Next meeting date is September the 8th, right?
Yes, sir.
And,
At 3:30 PM at TCC.
okay, 3:30 PM at TCC. Excellent. We've gone over the next meeting dates already. Agenda for the next meeting, our usual things plus create list of second tier candidates. That's really our one and only agenda item, right?
Yes, sir. And then we'll have an update from Mr. Cruteau, an introduction and a confirmation of our training dates. And per what you just decided, a decision, if needed, regarding
Travel expense.
travel expenses. Yes, sir.
All right, excellent. Anything else that anyone else wants to consider on the agenda for the next meeting? Seeing no takers, any member comments? Member comments. We've had some member comments at this meeting, which has always been, it's been particularly productive. Thanks so much for all of the engagement. If there's nothing else, we are adjourned. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Well done.
Please remember to turn your
Welcome
microphones
aboard,
off.
new committee member.